Coming to you from the M&M Exterior Studio in Knoxville, Virginia, this is Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle, the introvert's extrovert. She talks to people so you don't have to. For now.
Welcome back to Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle, the introvert's extrovert. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to have my friend Allison Griffin here today.
Hello.
Yay, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm super pumped to be here. This is my debut on podcast.
Yes, well, I'm glad that you could join the podcast world. You are a super involved person, and I'm surprised that you haven't been on podcasts yet.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
That's nice. I'm fanning myself. Tell me more.
Yes, I'm an active follower of you, of things you post and read and learn, and that's why I wanted to chat today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Yes.
Talk stuff.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, awesome.
To our listeners.
Yeah, so my name's Allison Griffin. I am dear old friends with Samantha and Jeremy here from our church community at Greenwich Presbyterian, and I am here today as a mama, wife, and mama. I know they're like a little conversation which comes first in your introduction.
Everyone's judging you based on how you introduce yourself.
Well, today's podcast is from the mama perspective.
Yes,
so
because you have many different hats that you wear.
Well, we all do, right?
Yeah.
So,
we all do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So wife and mom and full-time working mom, swim coach, business owner, politically active, volunteer,
sorority active.
Love. Yes. I just am a joiner. I have like a FOMO. I'm like, that's my jam. Don't want to miss out on anything. Probably overcommitted all the time, but try to give like about 85% everything I do.
Yeah. But that makes you a good source for, like I said, that's why I like following you, because I have FOMO too, but I definitely don't have the energy to do too much. So I like following people who do, because I'm like, oh, interesting. Learn something new there. So,
well, that's great. That's, I think with being here today, kind of why I'm here today, to like share some nuggets and insight and talk about my little man, Jackson. So that's probably my best and proudest accomplishment. Not probably. It is.
It is.
Yeah. So I am a mom to almost 4-year-old son, Jackson, and he was born with a rare form of dwarfism. Skeletal dysplasia is the medical terminology for that. The type called Diastrophic Dysplasia. And it happens in about 1 in about 500,000 births. They say, some people say like 300,000.
Oh, yeah.
Few. It's rare.
Yeah.
So that's kind of turned our world upside down. And so things are different than we thought they would be when we were having a baby.
Yeah.
But we cannot imagine life otherwise. So, but it has come with some unique challenges and some cool insights and an amazing community that we didn't even know we needed.
And introduced you to a whole, like you said, a whole other community, a whole new world.
Yeah.
And so we're talking now, of course, this episode will be available for all of time. But we want to make sure that it's coming out in the beginning of October, because October is Dwarfism Awareness Month.
That's right. That's right. So I think that one of the coolest things about where we are with Jackson and his diagnosis is that, probably 20 years ago, dwarfism was like sort of unheard of. Like people may have known someone who was a little person, or thought they did, oh, my like aunt, she was only 4'11", or just didn't really talk about it. Yeah. But I think in an age of social media and reality TV, for good, bad, and indifferent about reality TV, that's really changed the awareness of, this particular thing in terms of disabilities and differences. And so that's been awesome for us, because I don't know that we feel like it's come with as much baggage as parents for us, because we've had some exposure to it. Yeah. And people in general have a lot more exposure to it than ever before. Yes. But October is Dwarfism Awareness Month. There's a place to raise some awareness for people who don't understand or know what that's all about.
Yes. And I was excited to chat about this because, as I mentioned with your social media, you post a lot of great video clips of, other little people advocating, sharing their stories and things like that, which has been helpful to raise awareness for us, because stuff like you said, you didn't know about this community.
Right.
You got involved in it. And now your circles of influence are being introduced to new people, new things.
Yeah.
And so today we are kind of talking about what are the tools to navigate people that are different from you, kind of introducing you to new communities. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, helping people understand that everyone is different in some way. And that when you say like normal, that's a word, we toss around all the time. Like what's normal? Like that's everyone's normal is different, right?
Yeah. Because it's normal to them.
Exactly.
We talked about common sense some episode and how that's kind of a bad term because not everyone has the same
right.
thing.
That's not
so,
common sense. Like I would never have thought of that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it means different things to different people. And so, knowing that everybody has something that they're carrying with them, struggling with, some are more visible than others, right? So that's kind of where the discussion of different, like if you can see it, then it's like noteworthy. It's the stuff that you can't see obviously is noteworthy, but like it's in your face, literally in your face. And so Jackson's going to be 4 in February. And so it's just starting to really come to light for us in that way because his particular sort of symptoms isn't quite the right word, but appearance from dwarfism is different than say like one of the most common types, which is achondroplasia. So when you see those kids look a little bit different in terms of their proportions and have sort of a different recognizable look to them. His is really just short arms and legs. Like everything else is pretty well proportioned. So up until this point, in the last year or so, he just looked like a little baby / toddler. And I think probably the average observer would have had to look pretty closely to realize like, oh, those are not like the length of an average size, average height child's limbs.
Yeah. Or like you said, when he's talking in full sentences and people were like, oh, I thought he was.
Right.
They had put him in the box of some, a different age.
Right. Exactly. The age relationship to development. Sure. And so now, with his peers, he's a good foot shorter, if not more, depending on the toddler or I guess kid. They're not toddlers at 4 anymore, really. Yeah. And so we just have started to really have conversation about how to navigate that because we had sort of put it aside. Like, we were taking in all the information to like educate ourselves. And as average height parents, there's like some extra baggage because you have to realize that your kid's life is going to be different than you had imagined it would be, which, when we found out, we did like from the second we found out, I remember like still in tears, like coming home from some of those appointments being like, I have to find out, like I need the information. That's the kind of person I am. Yeah.
To give yourself some sort of control over a power, like you can't change it. So the thing you can do is educate yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And change your mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of to piggyback on your best bathroom stories. One of the very first things when we realized, when we got past that, this was not like going to be life threatening. Yeah. That was, the first concern. Was sort of adjusting, like, what are all the things that we are going to be different? Like, I wanted to plan, like, that day. Like, what I remember saying to Chris, like, well, we're going to have to move. We have to move now to, like, a 1-floor house. Like, he's not going to be able to navigate the stairs, and we got to build everything custom accommodations. Like, let's do this. And Chris was like, whoa.
Let's just get through.
Yeah. So, but to that end, I can remember the whole time I was pregnant thinking this is ridiculous. I'm sure it sounds ridiculous, but like the most challenging thing, like his entire life going to the bathroom is going to be a problem.
Yes.
And not a problem, but like
but it's
a challenge.
Different. And that's something people don't talk about. But it's a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like now here we are potty training. It's like, okay, this is like, So we're navigating and figuring that out. But that was the thing. I laugh every time I think like, oh, what was I most concerned about? Like how he was going to wipe his butt.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right. You got to think about that. Well, it was, as you were talking, it made me think that when I talked about the podcast and like, what do we want to talk about? I love talking to people. And so you and we talked about Dwarfism Awareness Month. And of course, we want to talk about not about people. We want to talk to people. But I think so that's of course true. I think it's also important though to hear your story because you did go through something. You are living life differently than you thought. And that's a reality of a lot of people too. So I guess what I'm trying to say, it's like both stories are important, you know? Right. And I almost feel like you sharing your story is bridging the gap to then talk to people that are different, you know, kind of that, you know, perspective of changing.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to say, like, when you're thinking about people who are different or you're, you know, encounter someone who's in a wheelchair or looks different, that's an opportunity to like meet them where they are. And as opposed to like turning to the person with you and saying like, oh my gosh, like what is going on over there? Like, did you see it? Which I'm guilty of. We're all guilty of, right? Like your curiosity as a human, like for things that are not the same as the way you are. Yeah. But being able to engage people, that it varies with people whether they're receptive to that. But I think generally people prefer that than to like looks and stares, like approaching them saying, hey, hi, like, how are you? Like I said, some people not so much, but I think that's a good place to start is to remember that they're people just like you and me. They just, you know, the outside looks different than the inside's the same.
So you said before, you know, you got the diagnosis with Jackson. And you touched upon, you know, kind of the initial reaction. How did you start moving towards the new normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I mean, like I said, the first thing I did is I just like internet. That's where you find everything. Yeah. Chris will even say to me, I'll ask him a question like random information. And he'll say, Google it. Like, I don't know. What do I look like? An encyclopedia, right?
Why do you think they have Google?
So that's immediately where I went, right? Started looking it up. And there's, of course, the doctors and people say, like, don't do that. Yeah. Like, you get the worst information, you know, like what pops up on Google. It's like a whole strip of pictures at the top. And we had some in-depth conversation already with the doctor. So, like, that was not as scary, I think. And that's not what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for, like, what's the worst case scenario? I was like, I just need the info, right? Yeah. And I mean, as luck would have it, I found a blog that a mom had started for her little guy. And I was like, holy crap, like this is it.
That's what you started reading it. Look for connection. It's finding the connection of someone who's walked the path and can help lead you through it.
Yeah. And I think unbeknownst to me, like I was looking for the information, like, and probably was looking for the pictures, like, what is it going to look like? How bad are things going to be? But what I really was looking for was the connection. Yeah. And happening upon that was like, I mean, that was literally probably within days of the first ultrasound where we found that out. Yeah. And it was great. So I went looking then, read through her blog and I was like, gosh, I need to like, this is not enough. Like, I need to know this mom. This mom is like speaking to my heart. And I found her on Facebook. Because she had created a page for her son, Brodie, and like connected and liked. And I had posted at that time, we had not really told, weren't really sure how to share that information really that widely. So we had the ultrasound picture, his sweet little thumb sucking picture. At the time we didn't know, but that thumb position was like kind of indicative of how his hands have grown. It's called hitchhiker thumb for diastrophic dysplasia. That's one of the manifestations in ortho because they don't have regular joints in the fingers. And so I posted that as my profile. Like, here we are. Everybody knew we were having the 20-week ultrasound. And I had just sort of like creeper, like on Facebook, liked some of her pictures and their page. And like within 24 hours, she had sent me a message. I was like, I'm sorry if this is creepy, but I noticed your profile picture and saw you liked our page. And I'm assuming that you have gotten the same diagnosis we did. And so it was like God's hands all over that. So, I'm
just laughing because we're both crying now. So like,
I mean, it's like, that's obviously not something to cry about, but it's just like, it brings me back to my like heart.
But and that she reached out to you because that's what you needed.
Yeah, for sure. And Marcella has become like, I said I wasn't going to name drop. But I would encourage you to follow on Facebook. If you're interested in really hearing the heart of the story of someone who's, conquering challenges in a meaningful way, it's Brodie's Big Adventure. Yeah. And so Brodie is about a year, almost exactly to the day, older than Jackson. So, I mean, it was like so fresh for them. And she just kind of took my hand and like had walked me through all the things I needed before he was even born. And I mean, when I was in the hospital, I was literally on the phone with her, like, so this is what, tell me about what did you do when they told you X, Y, and Z, and how did you handle that? And so it was just, that's been the biggest blessing, are the friendships and the connections we've made. And it's funny because I kept thinking like I was doing that for Jack. So like Jack would have friends and would know little people and would be connected to the community. And kind of like this podcast, I was like, oh, it's really more important to talk to some little people.
Yes.
He can't really talk about all that's going on. Yeah. But as his mom, I feel like that's part of my job. But it was more for me and more for my benefit, really. And that's been amazing. And that's led us to actually really become more and more connected with other adult little people, because that's really where the support kind of has taken us, is like, what should we be looking for? And like, how should we be parenting him differently, if at all? I mean, it's not really huge things, but as he grows, and obviously we'll start to ask more questions. And I think, there'll be things that we need to confront and, sort of walk him through. It equips us by having not only the parent network, but also the network of friends who are little people.
And I'm glad you described the progression of how that worked. And that's kind of when you had Marcella.
Yeah.
So she reached out to you, which was such a blessing, and gave you the hope that it sounds cliche, but it's that it gets better.
Yes.
And you need to know that it gets better, and you can tell yourself that, but when you actually see someone living that out.
Yeah. On the other side of where you are is like,
and now you can turn around and give that. And so, which is why I said, yes, we do, me especially, like I want to connect with people and, talk to people about all these things. But you have a very unique experience too to share, though, too. So.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And I think,
and I like how you went on that journey to kind of show you don't stay in that one place. It grows.
Yeah. So. I mean, sort of laughing kind of through the tears, but it's not to say that it's funny, but it's laughable now to think like how dramatic that was at the time. Like looking back at myself, I can remember like laying in bed and just like sobbing. And not being upset now, realizing it wasn't about what had happened and how things were going to proceed, that Jack was not, perfect or normal or all those things. But it's more the grieving, the loss of what you...
Yeah, you mourn the loss of what you thought you were going to have.
Yeah. And it's the enormity of changing your whole outlook on things. And now, while we're in it, realizing didn't change that much. It really didn't change that much for us. And that's not everybody's experience. I mean, some people have spent days and hours and months in the hospital or at doctor's appointments. We've been very blessed in that up until now, Jack's been really healthy and hasn't had as much orthopedic issue or, any kind of issue or complications, but that might not always be the case. And so part of, we feel compelled, or I think called, to make sure that we're supporting our friends in that same journey, because and it's not, I don't think it's a question of if, but when we are faced with something similar, we know we've got the community to fall back on. So we try to jump in whenever we can. We've got some local friends, but we travel to see some of our Brodie's family comes and has treatment. And so we try to make sure we can be there to support them, because that's tough when you're just handling things on a whole nother level aside from just regular life, and your kid is, putting them in the hands of surgeons and doctors, and you just don't know how that's going to come out.
And people can't understand, we, meaning like me as your friend, I can support you, but I haven't walked through it. So I can't support you nearly in the way Marcella can or someone else. And you said something too that I thought was important, which is when you were grieving it and it was so dramatic and hard, you say, you look back now and it's like, well, it's not that different. But I heard something once. It's like, when we compare our pain to other people's pain, it's like, well, hers is worse because of this. But the thing is, if this is the worst I've ever felt, it's the worst I've ever felt. And she was able to meet you where you were at, just like you'll be able to meet other people where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And walk with them through that, because that's part of the process. And then, like I said, and then seeing that it gets better. But I don't think we wake up, we're like, oh, okay, I know it'll get better. Boom. Like, you have to go through all I don't know, it's a process.
Yeah,
So,
it is. It is for sure.
But
There's
having someone walk through with you, I just think that's the most crucial thing.
Yeah, it for sure. Yeah, and I think that one of the things too that we're finding now, as like I said, things are great. He's an average crazy little 3.5, almost 4-year-old,
full of personality.
That would have, I think, like, oh, would he be the same person he is if it weren't for the skeletal dysplasia? And I'm like, well, yeah, because one, he doesn't know any better.
Yeah.
And like, that's his personality. That's Chris and I, And so it's funny because people say like, oh, we're so proud of what you're doing in a way you're raising him. And we're like, what? Why? Like, that's what, like, he's our kid. That's we're not really not doing anything special other than just being the best parents we can be.
Yeah. So you can't speak for little people, and you said your LP friends, right? So they're just to kind of update people. So little people is, I would say, an appropriate or I was going to say desired word, but
so, and I mean, I guess maybe to make one of the takeaway talking points is that terminology is important because for any community of people or any type of people, like, claiming who you are and identity is important. Yeah. But everybody really just wants to be called by their name, right?
Yep.
That's kind of that human kindness. Everybody has their own differences. Normal is not a thing, I guess.
And like you said before, like, Jackson is normal Jackson. That's who he is. So to put a label in front of his name, well, we wouldn't do that with my kid, Redhead Riley. I mean, I guess we could, but,
Right, right.
But she wouldn't want to be called that, she would just want to be called Riley. So Jackson, same exact kid, wants to be Jackson.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, people's curiosity, questions about the unknown. And I think in this day and age, people are sensitive, right, to labels and differences in terms of vernacular. What do we call them? Little people, yes, that's an acceptable. Dwarf is pretty commonly acceptable. Some, I think people would say like, I don't like that as much.
Because it depends on the individual.
It does depend on the individual.
Yeah. And I only asked you that just because, like you said, you are introduced to a new community. So just to kind of, I look at it as like looping people in, like.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of what I've learned, and like there's some various opinions. And similarly, people will often ask, this is not in the necessarily, this is a little tangent from the names and like what words do we use. But people would always ask when they know more information, not always, but a lot of times, well, have you considered like, would he have surgery? Like, wouldn't you want to do like limb lengthening, or isn't there medication to help him grow more? And it's like, yes and no. Like, this is who he is. We're not going to make a decision for him to change who he is when he gets to an age. If he wants to, that's appropriate. And some people feel like, yes, that's totally a great option. Other people like, no, this is who I am. This is my community. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is my identity. So that's kind of along the lines of like those names, the names and the words used to describe. Yeah. One of the things that is definitely a big no-no, I think, using the word midget, and I know gets some controversy too. Still, people feel like, well, it just means small, which, yes, it's, not necessarily used in an aggressive or derogatory way, like as a description. But the origin of it from the dwarfism community is rooted in a time when, as part of like a circus or a sideshow, that little people were on display.
Yeah, for entertainment purposes.
And not also in control of their own agency as far as that goes. Like nowadays, some of the controversy I'll hear. So we have a local business that just hosted an event, and it was like, oh, okay. Yeah. But a lot of people will say, well, those are little people who've chosen to do that, which is true. But then that presents that image to a whole audience of people that see little people using or being used as entertainment. So like there's the reality of it. Like, yes, that's maybe the way they have chosen to make a living or, participate, but it has a larger implication.
And that's why I love the conversation. If you just leave it at, well, they chose to, so that's the end of the conversation. Like, no, they chose to, and that's fine. Like, that's their right as far as that's what they want to do. But we need to have the conversation about why that's hurtful to understand. And same with the words and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, something like never would have given any thought to. And in fact, I can remember at least once, probably twice, when Jack was younger and we'd be talking about something and I literally would use the M word. And I was like, Chris would be like, what did you just say? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I literally just said that. Like, so it's kind of, it's the awareness. It's, kind of back to the dwarfism awareness. Like, what are the issues for folks who are in that particular community?
So since Jackson was born, what are some nuggets that you could share that you would want either other parents going through it to know, or just, I think also everyone to know? What are just things that you've now learned that you want to share with others?
I think that, we kind of touched on it with the first thing in talking about the labels, right? And what kind of words do you use, that it's really just important to treat everyone you meet as a person and using their name versus trying to figure out what to call them if they're different. That's, I think, a big thing. And I know it's our human nature to want to identify. Like I said, it's that underlying curiosity, fear a little bit, but like not understanding something that's not our own experience.
And so that's a great segue to, okay, let's say, especially listeners that have the small children that ask vocal questions and whatnot. So what to do when we meet people different than us? Do we, because I feel like everyone's, reaction is, shh, don't point, don't stare, don't talk about it, scurry away.
Right.
So
sure.
how?
Yeah. So I think every one of those opportunities is to be, I would look at it and hope Jackson would look at it as making a new friend, right? That's his thing. He does that anyway. And so it kind of gives me that insight. Like, he doesn't look at anybody in terms of like, oh my gosh, pointing, staring, like scary, like, ooh, that person's different. He asks questions like if he doesn't understand something. And that's, I think, the place you should come from with your kids in fostering some curiosity respectfully. And I think that's the best way to do that, is to address whoever the person is. If you're in the grocery store, just say, hi, like, how are you? And if there's more questions that are coming from your kid, don't be embarrassed by them. You can encourage them or sort of bridge the gap with whoever that person is and say, is it okay if we ask you some questions? Or why don't you ask? Why don't you ask him his or her name? I think that's, like I said, the starting point to address that as, I was about to use the word normal, but address that as person to person rather than normal person to different person.
Yes. And I don't know if we talked about this earlier or not. So either way, we'll touch base again, is why not use the word normal? Yeah. That's fair. That, once again, that's one of those things that before you brought it up, it's just part of a regular, is it vernacular or something, part of your normal speak. Like, of course, something's either normal and then it's different. Why is that? Of course. But once you explained it, so I want you to explain it again.
So I think, and again, sort of back to, we had to educate ourselves and make a concerted effort to kind of learn how to be in this space. And that was one of the things, like when we were talking about Jackson, and I would say like, well, in a normal child, and it was like, time out. He is normal. Yeah. He's different than other kids in certain ways. So drawing the distinction that like his difference is that other children are average height. So that's kind of the way that that's described in the LP community. You talk about average height kids, siblings, because a lot of families who have LP children have siblings who are average height, parents who are average height, right? So that's the description, because that is what it is. They're average height. Your other child, parent, whoever is of a smaller height. And so I think that's the kind of the important thing that we walked through in the beginning, saying like, okay, this is normal for us now, but we're still not trying to avoid using that, because it just kind of generalizes things that are generalizes and puts things that are out of the ordinary.
Yeah. Well, no one wants to be different. It's, would you want to I'm imagining, I don't know. Well, that's the wrong way to say it, but if someone's always saying how you're different, how you're different, how you're different.
Yeah. Well, so I'll use an example, not to like call you out, but when we first met, but I'm going to call you out. Please. I can remember you always used to make reference to being so tall. And that for you, that's what's different, right? Mm-hmm. But that's normal for you, right? Jokingly like, oh, you can see like above things. I how's the air up there?
Yeah. For people that don't know me, I'm like 5'10", so I'm not, not that tall.
Not
then I
a
meet
giant.
other people. Well, then I meet other people and I'm like, dang, I talk about how tall I am and there's people taller than me. And now I like, oh, I don't want them to feel like I'm talking about their height, talking about mine.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, for everybody, we have something that's like that. You said like Riley, like she's redhead, like redhead like and freckles. You. Like that was my thing as a kid all the time. And as a kid, like that was different. I can remember freckle face, like being picked on. And I don't know how, but I didn't ever feel really bad about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember feeling different and like, nobody else looks this way. Although there was one kid in my elementary school class who was freckled face like I am, but not like the full body, like ginger hair on fire and freckles everywhere. So, I mean, we all have that thing. And now that's just, that's talking about on the surface, the physical differences, which I think is where it hits home because that's what you see, right? Yeah. You see. But, even the other kind of things like, oh, she never goes out of the house. Like, people who you're always wondering, like, what's going on with them because they're not like the rest of us. Or they're, like, why doesn't she join in? Why aren't you, like, more social? Or, I mean, I'm just thinking in my head, like, those kind of, like, hidden things that people are carrying with them that everybody's got it. And so I think that's where the word normal, just, like, toss that out. Like, just kind of detach yourself from that idea and, embrace that different is normal.
What's another takeaway you've had?
So I think it's important to remember that you should treat others the way that you would want to be treated, right? That's the golden rule. And assuming that like you're not into like hating yourself. I guess when I say that, I'm like, oh, maybe that's not the right way to say it.
Well, that's why that's a good tie in though to last week's episode, how Christy talked about the platinum rule, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. So your intention is still 100% accurate. It's just a way to flip it to like, it kind of goes back to what words we use. You might not care what words, and you might meet someone who they don't care what words are. And that's, so you find out like, I think about asking questions. Is it okay if I ask you about this? Find out what people prefer. And that's when you build a relationship. You don't ask all those questions right away. You get to know them just for what's your name.
Right.
Build the relationship. But as you build the relationship, then you can figure out, what do you want? How can I be a good friend to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's key, that build the relationship. Talked about and made reference to like the casual interaction, like the grocery store or like out on the street or wherever, which is a little more like as a quick hit. But if you're talking about how do I help my kids learn that, that's the most prevalent probably situation you find yourself in. And there, like the questions are asking the questions is a little more like, but just smiling, right? Like making eye contact and smiling and saying hi. That's all it takes, right? Because the alternative is the stares or the like quick turn away or like the whispering, like, right? And I find myself all the time doing that, even just like as I'm going about my business. I was kind of a person who's like, sometimes I'm on, sometimes I'm like head down, like you're in my way in the checkout, like get away from the milk. I'm trying to get over there. Like, what are you doing? But it just makes you aware because you just never know where people are in their day-to-day lives. And like that eye contact and smile could be what they need, whether they're struggling or not, right? Yeah.
Because for everyone could use an eye contact and a smile. And also like you just brought up is kind of being true to who you are. If you're not in a chatty mood, then if you see someone who is not like you, you don't have to suddenly turn it on and be like, I'm going to go ask this person their name. And and it's like, no, it's like,
just be you.
Yeah, be you.
Do you. Yeah. And like assume that the other person has the same basic needs, wants, etc. that you do, right? Maybe to be left alone in the aisle at the grocery store.
Exactly. Read the room, people.
Read the room. And that's that platinum rule, right? Like maybe just because you feel like, oh, I need to know what's going on with that person. Let me go chat them up. Right. Like a hi and an eye contact and a keep on walking does wonders. Yeah.
And so for you, you are in our community. For us, because of where we know each other, there's more opportunity for conversation. As Jackson gets older, could you walk through a scenario that would be appropriate? You have kids and they say stuff and do stuff and
so we do have occasion where we've had some situations. I think because of his personality, he gets away with not really causing too much of a stir, right? Because people are a little bit drawn to him because he's a showman and he's like all up in their business and likes to make everyone laugh.
That's why I feel when you talked about cute before, I'm like, but he is so cute. He's so lovable. I don't know, his personality. He's just very funny.
And so we're kind of at the point where he's going to be 4. And so that cute is much more of an act now. It's not right where he like lives. Yeah. I mean, 100%. Any toddler or like, 3-4-year-old like is a monster at home and like, you know, if
turns it
on. But I think the propensity now is for him to know that he's got a crowd and an audience. And so like not getting 100% like his real reaction to things. But that's also how he, I think, puts himself at ease, right? So then he can kind of feel out like, is the room friendly? I don't know. Yeah. I think I see that, and sometimes I think subconsciously it's kind of like his mechanism for coping, because I see that he's starting to kind of understand. And part of that is the toddler transition. He'll say like, I'm a big boy now. And I'll be like, yes, because he means like he's going to be 4. Yeah. But sometimes he means like, I'm grown enough now to do it, which is hard because I don't think Chris and I are 100% prepared to have that, like to fully have that conversation. So that's kind of the season we're in right now. Yeah. But
has he noticed if he's
there's been average 2 times where he said, I wish my arms were longer. And it was in relationship to like dressing himself, which is the current thing that we're really like trying to push him to do and make the right accommodations. Like everything else he's figured out. Like he knows he needs a stool. He can't reach things. And he'll say things like, oh, well, I can't reach that. And I'm like, but you need to try. Because he's starting to use can't more often. Because I think the example I was started to give was that he gets the baby comment more so now because of the difference in size and comparison with peers. Yeah. And sometimes he's like, jumps on that real quick. I'm not a baby. And sometimes then I think it sits with him and he uses it when he wants to. But I also think it sits with him and he's trying to wrestle with that. Like, am I a big boy or am I still a baby? And like today I'm going to be a baby. Tomorrow I'm going to be a big boy, or 5 minutes from now.
And that's something too that's I think normal, like, well, like a normal development. Like that's something they all struggle with. But then you have this added layer. And I appreciate too, I wanted to also comment like on your vulnerability with that. We talked in the beginning about grieving the loss of what you thought your life was going to be like. And I think what I was just reminded of when we were just talking about that is it's not a one-time feeling. Yeah. It's that each of these stages you experience that. Yeah. And for parents that are to know that, and that's okay too, that you can be the strong parent, because from what I've seen and read and that you've shared with me and whatnot, it's like, okay, you have to not coddle. I mean, we have to all not coddle our children, but like he has to learn to do things for himself, and you have to give, I'm trying to think of the words, like it's not like tough love or anything, but not do things for him so that he can learn to be independent and things like that. And I feel like when you read it in a blog post or someone's kind of through it, it sounds very, nope, this is just what we do. We don't pick him up. He just has to walk up the stairs by himself. But for you to acknowledge the pain that causes you in your parent heart, like that's, it's just.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because haven't really probably talked a lot about this in a while, because we feel, I say we, I'm speaking for Chris, but I feel like a little guilty that that's the struggle I'm having. Whereas we have other friends, mom friends, parents, and their kids who are really struggling. And that's where, like you said, you can't compare. Yeah. But at the same time, kind of helps. It keeps you a little bit tougher because like we could be dealing with a lot more. Yeah. So that's, So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Your journey. Thank you for, as I said, being vulnerable. And that's not something that you just decide to be. It's just who you are. And so thank you. Thanks for being willing to share your story and your journey. And I know that it gives hope not only to parents that are going through that, but like I said, I've learned so much just from watching you, because I want to be a better person to people, you know, and my kids, you know, it's like your shirt says raise good humans. Like,
That's right.
you know, how can we? And I think the more we hear other people's stories, journeys, life lessons, we can then pass that on to our kids.
Yeah. So. And I mean, I too want to say, like, by no means am I doing it perfectly, right?
Yeah.
Just figuring it out like we all do. But I think the importance of finding the resources or just being open and appreciating other perspectives, right? Like we did that by necessity. But even if, like, you know, like you said, like you just, you know, reading and following along and just, oh, wow, like I never even thought about that.
Yep.
Like there's so much good out there that you can glean from people who are doing things that you would never think of doing, or in the middle of stuff that like doesn't like is not up your alley. That's not your jam. And then, you know, in turn, you'll find ways and places that pays off later on down the road. So I think thanking me for being vulnerable, but I would say like, thanks for people out there for other people being willing to be open and vulnerable to whether it's your, like I said, fear of the unknown or like not understanding or just what's going on over there. Like, I just don't know. Now you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
thanks
you're
for doing
welcome.
this.
You bet.
I appreciate you sharing about your family and yourself.
For sure. Well, thanks. Appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for now.
Thanks for listening to Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle. Music provided by twinmusicom.org. Song titled Night at the Dance Hall. Sound editing by me, Jeremy Spittle. A special thanks to our studio sponsor, M&M Exteriors. Visit their website at mmexteriors.com for all of your roofing, siding, and gutter needs in the Northern Virginia area. Visit our website at flushingitout.com and be sure to subscribe. This has been a Spitfire production.
That was the greatest thing I've ever heard.